He's a millionaire. His car broke down on the side of the road. She was just an ordinary woman showing up at the right moment, ready to help. But when his eyes landed on the ring on her finger, everything changed. That ring, it couldn't be. Who was she? And why was she wearing it? You won't believe the truth behind that ring. It was already pitch dark when Graham Lockwood realized his car wasn't going anywhere. His silver Rolls-Royce, a symbol of his success, was now stranded on a dusty, narrow country road, flanked by empty, abandoned fields stretching endlessly on both sides. He glanced at his watch. 8:47 p.m. No cafe, no gas station, not even a signal on his phone. With a frustrated sigh, he stepped out of the car. The night wind from the fields brushed across his face, carrying the scent of rotting grass. The last time he had been in a place like this was, well, never. Graham Lockwood was born to thrive among glass buildings, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women with nude lipstick, not an air that smelled thick of time and disappointment. In the distance, he saw a faint light coming from a small garage, a rusted, crooked sign, Bell Auto Repair. With no other choice, he strode toward it, his Italian leather shoes sinking slightly in the soft dirt. The workshop door was left ajar, only the soft hum of jazz and the sharp scent of motor oil filling the space inside. He was just about to knock when he heard a woman's voice. Car broke down? If it's a Rolls-Royce, I'm guessing it's either a locked-up electronic system or a weak battery. Graham startled. A woman stepped out from the shadows. She looked to be in her early 40s, hair neatly braided, deep brown skin, eyes calm and clear. She wore a dark blue jumpsuit, her hands stained with grease, and there was something about her that unsettled him. Not because of her messy appearance, but the quiet confidence in the way she looked at him like she had known him for years. "You're not from around here," she said evenly. "Broke down near Route 9, right?" He hesitated, then nodded. She opened a drawer, pulled out a toolbox, and didn't ask anything else. "Take me to the car. I've got a jump starter with me. If that doesn't work, I'll tow it back here." On the walk back, Graham glanced sideways at her. She didn't make small talk, didn't ask who he was, didn't seem the least bit impressed by his six-figure car. Part of him felt relieved, another part uneasy. The car came into view under the faint yellow light. She crouched down to check beneath it while Graham stood with arms crossed, watching. Then his gaze stopped at her hand, where a worn silver ring glinted under the light. The engraving was faded, but his heart skipped a beat. No, it couldn't be. He had seen that ring before, a long time ago, on the hand of a woman he thought he had buried in the past. And now it was on the hand of the woman who had just rescued him from being stranded in the middle of nowhere. Graham stood frozen, his eyes locked on the tarnished silver ring on the mechanic's hand. A flood of tangled memories surged back. Memories he had tried hard to bury. 15 years ago, when his company, Lockwood Real Assets, was still an up-and-coming player in real estate, he'd been involved in a land dispute that shook the region of Harlan's Bend, once home to a long-standing black community. It was land he had taken through legal maneuvering, bought for a fraction of its worth, and leveled with bulldozers. That ring, it belonged to Lydia Green, the woman who had led the legal battle against him. She was tough, educated, but ultimately crushed by the system. Graham still remembered vividly the day she walked out of the courthouse, clutching her young daughter's hand and saying, "I may lose the land, but I won't lose my roots." Now that same ring was on the hand of the mechanic, calmly wiping down his spark plug. "What's your name?" Graham asked, his voice straining to stay steady. "Rowena," she replied without looking up. "Rowena Bell." He froze. Bell, that name had been in the documents he once signed in the compensation files. One of the families forced off the Harlan land. Graham's eyes darkened. This couldn't be coincidence. "You used to live in Harlan's Bend?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Rowena let out a soft laugh. "Only outsiders called it that. Folks from there called it Hollow's Root. But now there's no name left. It's all a shopping center, isn't it?" Her tone was calm, but Graham could hear every needle hidden in her words. She knew, and she was testing him. "That ring," he said, pointing. "Where did you get it?" She finally looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Her gaze glowed under the car light, not angry, not trembling, just the quiet knowing of someone who had seen too much. "It was my mother's," Rowena said simply. "She left it to me when she passed." She once told me there'd be a man who'd recognize this ring if I waited long enough. Graham's heart sank. He realized this wasn't a random encounter. She hadn't just happened to show up in the middle of the night to fix his car. She knew him. And maybe she had been waiting for him for a very long time. Rowena closed the hood, wiped her hands on a cloth, and said something that made his blood run cold. Your car is good to go, but the story between you and me is just getting started. Graham drove off, but his mind was no longer on the suburban road, flickering with dim yellow lights. Rowena's final words kept playing in his head like a stuck record. The story between you and me is just getting started. He knew all too well that the things he'd done in the past couldn't be wrapped up and buried forever. Harlan's Bend, or Hollow's Root as Rowena called it, had once been a peaceful stretch of land where hundreds of black families had lived together for generations. But back when he was climbing the ladder in real estate, that land had appeared on a development map as an opportunity too good to pass up. Opportunity meant profit. It meant a glowing shopping complex in place of weathered wooden homes. He had told his shareholders, "We're not taking anything. We're bringing progress." And they applauded. Graham remembered that backroom meeting like it was yesterday. A team of his lawyers, all white, all polished, had laid out exactly how to make the land grab legal, how to prove the community didn't have rightful ownership, how to silence the loudest voices, how to reduce a century of history into a few scattered pages in a court file. They did it, and Lydia Green, Rowena's mother, was the last to leave. She had resisted, had fought, but in the end, she was crushed by the system. Graham still remembered her walking away, eyes dry, with no tears left to cry. He didn't think much about Lydia after that, just another obstacle taken care of. But now, Rowena's return changed everything. Not just because she was Lydia's daughter, but because she had appeared at the exact moment he was preparing a new project, bigger, more ambitious, set in East Monroe, a neighborhood facing the same kind of dispute Harlan once had. That project was the final key to Graham's exit from the business world, a high-stakes gamble meant to secure his legacy. He had staked his reputation, his wealth, and his name on it. If Rowena was quietly targeting him, if she had evidence, or worse, if she was rallying those he had once trampled, Graham suddenly understood that the past wasn't drifting back like a strange breeze. It was returning as a storm, and Rowena, with eyes as unwavering as her mother's once were, was the eye of that storm, headed straight for him. The next morning, Graham woke up in his penthouse apartment, but the peace he usually felt was gone. No alarm clock rang, no meetings awaited him, yet his mind was in chaos, as if the entire building were crumbling brick by brick. He stepped out onto the balcony and looked down at the city. The traffic-filled streets, the skyscrapers glittering in the morning sun, all of it was part of what he had built. But now, every brick felt like a silent accusation. Nearly 30 years ago, when Graham was still a young, ambitious investor, he had made a private deal with Lydia Green. No one in the company knew. One night, after the Hollows Root community had officially been evicted, Lydia came to his office carrying a bundle of documents and handwritten notes, proof that part of the land had been seized illegally. "You said you'd help us convert ownership," Lydia said coldly, "but you betrayed us. I'm not suing, I'm not screaming, but I'm keeping this. One day, either I or my child will come back." Back then, Graham had scoffed. He thought she was delusional about her power. But instead of destroying the papers, he kept them. Not out of respect, but out of fear. There was something in Lydia's eyes that stopped him from throwing them away. Now, with Rowena's arrival, that past came roaring back with suffocating clarity. Graham walked into his study and opened the safe. It was still there, the old brown envelope, sealed shut, the faded handwriting reading, Hollow's Root Documents, GH. He held the envelope, his hands trembling. Maybe Rowena didn't know about it. Maybe she was just searching for justice for her mother, unaware that he had kept these things like an unpaid debt. But he knew, and that was enough to unsettle him. Graham turned to his computer screen. He opened his email and clicked on a special folder labeled Emerald, the vault for all project maps and files for the new development in East Monroe. He had planned to proceed just like he had with Hollow's Root, using a front company, pressuring residents into signing away their land through convoluted legal language. Now what? Could he still go through with it? The phone rang. An internal call. The receptionist's voice came through. "Mr. Graham, there's a woman in the lobby. Her name is Rowena Green. She says you owe her a cup of coffee." He looked out the window again. This time, the sun was gone. Graham stood there, gripping the phone, his heart pounding. Was she really here? Rowena Green, the girl he had tried to forget for nearly 3 decades, was now standing beneath the lavish dome of his empire, right at the very place he had built his legacy. And she wasn't here to make peace. "Coffee, Graham?" Rowena's voice came from the doorway, cold and challenging. "Or do you still prefer whiskey like you used to?" "Come in, Rowena," Graham nodded, his voice firm. "I don't think we have much time for pleasantries." Rowena stepped into the room, her eyes locked on Graham as she took the seat across from him. No greeting, no small talk, just that unblinking stare, like she was peeling back the layers of his wealth to expose every secret he'd buried. "Is there something you want to say?" Graham asked, trying to stay composed, though a storm was building inside him. Rowena glanced at the coffee cup, then looked up, her gaze like an arrow aimed straight at him. "My mother is dead, not from age, because of you. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Graham. You know what you did to my family." The words hit Graham like a punch to the gut. He couldn't deny it. He knew very well that he was the one who had pushed Lydia, Rowena's mother, to the brink. He had used his power and wealth to seize the land from the poor, exchanging it for what he called opportunity. "What do you want from me?" Graham lowered his voice, his eyes lighting up as if trying to command himself. "You want justice," Rowena replied, her tone calm. "Justice that you've been running from for 30 years. "You won't get anywhere with this, Rowena," Graham said, his hands clenched, his mind tense. "If you're trying to threaten me, I suggest you think again." Rowena smiled, unafraid. "No, I'm not threatening you, Graham. I'm just here to remind you of one thing. This debt hasn't been paid, and today you will pay the price." The storm outside raged on, the thunder booming like a reminder of the tense conversation unfolding in the room. Graham couldn't take his eyes off Rowena, the woman standing there, silent yet commanding. She didn't say anything more, but her gaze alone was enough to make him feel uneasy, a sensation he had never felt throughout his entire life. Graham tried to maintain his calm exterior. "I've already told you, Rowena, you can't do anything to me. You won't get anywhere with these empty threats." Rowena didn't rush to respond, silently lifting her coffee cup to her lips before gently setting it down on the table. "Sure, Graham. I'm sure you think that. But I didn't come here to talk to you like a regular adversary. I'm here to help you understand that everything you've built can come crashing down in an instant." Her eyes sparkled, full of confidence, as though she had been preparing for this battle for a long time. You have a secret, don't you, Graham? A secret that you think you can hide forever. A secret that you thought you had destroyed all the evidence of. What are you talking about?" Graham lowered his voice, but couldn't hide the anxiety in his eyes. Rowena sat up straight, her gaze never leaving him. "Don't try to hide it anymore, Graham. I know about the ring you've kept all these years. The ring you received from him, the man you deceived to take that land. You thought you erased all the traces, but that ring is still there, and I found it." Graham's heart raced, his blood seeming to freeze. The ring, how could she know about it? It was the only piece of evidence that could expose everything he had done. If Rowena had it, it would all be over. "Don't think I'm here just to make empty threats," Rowena continued, her voice firm. "I'm going to bring that ring to light, and when I do, everything will crumble. Your empire, the name you've built, it will all turn to dust." Graham felt a wave of panic rise within him, but he kept his cold facade. "You don't understand, Rowena. You don't know how much I've sacrificed to get everything I have today, and you think you can destroy it all with a ring?" Rowena smiled knowingly. "Yes, I don't understand, but I don't need to. What I'm doing is to ensure justice is served. As for you, Graham, you've been living in your own shadow for too long. It's time to face the consequences of your actions." She didn't need to say anything more. It was all decided. Graham felt like he was being cornered, but he still wouldn't let her win. He might lose everything, but he wouldn't let her easily destroy what he had built. "We'll see who comes out on top," Graham said, his tone resolute. "But don't think I'll give up easily." Rowena simply smiled, saying nothing more. She knew the battle had only just begun. 3 months ago, Rowena's public law office felt almost suffocated by the piles of unresolved case files. She was reviewing all the witness testimonies regarding the land Graham had seized when her gaze suddenly landed on an old file, its edges yellowed. Zone 7, the disappearance of Curtis Mayfield. Curtis, a former land surveyor hired to oversee the property valuation of the black community in East Claridge, had vanished after unexpectedly protesting the low compensation offers. The case file concluded that he resigned and left the state. But something didn't sit right with Rowena. Curtis had a clean record, no debts, no criminal history, no reason to run. Then she remembered the ring. The ring Graham had worn that day, worn, scratched gold engraved with faint letters, TMC 91. She had once thought it was a personal mark, but now she didn't. Rowena pulled up a security camera still from the day Graham's car was vandalized, the moment he accidentally revealed his hand gripping the steering wheel. She zoomed in. The letters became clearer. TMC, short for the Mayfield Consortium, a small real estate development firm that went bankrupt in 1993, and 91 was the parcel of land in Claridge that Curtis had appraised. Rowena stood up suddenly as if someone had slapped her awake. The ring wasn't Graham's, it was Curtis's. Maybe Graham had kept it as a trophy, or Curtis wasn't dead and was in hiding. She called Ernest, the investigative reporter who had once followed Curtis's disappearance case. I need you to check the nursing homes, shelters, and humanitarian organizations across the state. Look for someone who used to be a land surveyor, showing signs of mental instability or mild traumatic brain injury. An hour later, Ernest called back. I have someone, using the alias Chris May. He can't remember who he is, but he likes to draw land maps and taps on the table in Morse code. Rowena drove through the night to Hope Haven Recovery Center. In a small room by the window, she saw an elderly man with silver hair scribbling on paper, a map of Claridge with number 91 circled in red. It was no one else. It was Curtis. Do you remember me? Rowena asked, holding out the ring. Curtis stared, his eyes twitching slightly. His trembling hand reached out, pointing at the ring, then to his throat as if choking. Rowena tightened her grip on his hand. Don't be afraid. I will make everything clear. The atmosphere in the room seemed heavy, each sigh from Graham pulling away a piece of the last bit of calm he had left. Rowena didn't need to say anything more, but her gaze, cold and full of resolve, spoke volumes. She had closed the game. The forces were beginning to shift, and Graham felt the clear threat looming. Graham stood up, walking like a beast cornered. He knew Rowena was not someone easily threatened or bribed, but he still had a way out. He couldn't let that ring fall into her hands, couldn't let his secret be exposed. All right, Graham said, his voice lowering. You want to play this game? Let's see who stands last. Rowena didn't respond immediately, just shot a sharp look at him, then stood up. I'm not playing games, Graham. I'm just doing what needs to be done. She moved closer, each step a stern declaration of war. Feeling the threat, Graham suddenly realized things were no longer as simple as before. Rowena wasn't just a smart woman. She was an opponent he couldn't underestimate. She had the ring, the evidence, and the power he hadn't anticipated. Graham's hands suddenly trembled as he thought about how Rowena had found that ring. It wasn't a coincidence that she was able to trace these clues. She had been quietly observing him for a long time, studying every small detail of his life, finding the gaps he hadn't noticed. I could stop, Rowena said, her voice calm, yet full of sarcasm, as long as you give back everything you've taken from others. But if you keep being stubborn, I won't go easy on you. But he couldn't back down. It was too late for that. You don't understand, Rowena. If you think you can destroy me with that ring, you're wrong. Rowena smirked. I don't need that ring to bring you down. I just need one decisive blow, and you'll realize your world is over. The air in the room was thick, tense. Graham knew that if he didn't act now, everything would fall into Rowena's hands, but he wasn't someone who gave up easily. He turned away, began rummaging through a drawer, trying to stay calm while his mind raced against time. Rowena wasn't in a hurry. She stood still, unmoving, just observing him. She knew that everything Graham was doing now was just a reaction on instinct. He had lost control. Don't you get it yet? Rowena said softly, but each word felt like a knife thrust straight into Graham's heart. You've already lost. And when she said that, Graham knew he had no way out. Everything was slipping through his fingers. The atmosphere in Graham's mansion began to feel unusual just a few hours after his encounter with Rowena. At that moment, Graham was making phone calls repeatedly to some old contacts, but no one was answering. Those who had once been loyal to him were now pulling away. Perhaps they smelled danger. Perhaps they had heard the news. Meanwhile, Rowena did not hesitate. She drove her old pickup truck to a small house on the outskirts where a man named Curtis lived in hiding. He was the last witness, someone who had worked on the land surveying team in the Hollow Ridge area nearly 30 years ago. Curtis opened the door, recognized her, and remained silent for a long moment before inviting her inside. His gaze was cautious, but not closed off. "Rowena, right? You're Viola's daughter," Curtis said, as if not asking, but confirming. Rowena nodded. "I know what happened on that land, but I need your word to piece together the final part." Curtis paused, as if pulled back into the years he wanted to bury. "Do you know they threatened to kill me? After I discovered the duplicate records, the fake land purchase papers, I took them to court, but those records vanished. The next day, my house was burned down. My wife died from the smoke. Since then, I disappeared off the map." His voice cracked, his hand trembled. But then Curtis pulled an old notebook from the drawer. "I kept a copy, I don't know why, maybe waiting for the right person to come." Rowena opened the notebook. Inside were land boundary maps, forged signatures, inaccurate timestamps, and most importantly, the signature of the final approver, Graham Thorne. "This is a confession," Rowena whispered. "No, not yet," Curtis replied. "You need this." He pulled out an old tape recording, Graham's voice, ordering the papers to be altered, threatening Curtis, and even laughing as he said, "They'll never know. We bought this whole town with a magic trick." Rowena gasped. She had enough: the documents, the audio, and a living witness. "What are you going to do with it?" Curtis asked, his eyes red. Rowena stood up, her gaze sharp as a knife. "Expose it. No more magic tricks." Meanwhile, Graham received the news. A copy of the old documents had been leaked to a series of independent journalists, human rights lawyers, and federal investigators. Someone was unearthing his dark history. He slammed the phone onto the floor, his heart racing. She didn't just threaten, she's acting. And for the first time in 30 years of manipulation, Graham felt truly exposed. The net had been cast, and this time, he was the prey. Graham didn't sleep a wink all night. The phone kept ringing, but he didn't answer. On the screen were familiar names: his personal lawyer, local officials, a few former loyal allies. But this time, they weren't calling to help. They were calling to escape. The news spread faster than he anticipated. By the next morning, the headlines were all over the papers. Leaked documents exposed decades-long land theft scheme. Graham Thorne, from philanthropist to state-level fraud suspect. They even aired a recording of his voice on TV. "We bought this whole town with a magic trick." He shattered the glass in his hand. Blood dripped onto the cold marble floor of the mansion. "Rowena," he growled, as if calling out to a ghost. A name he had long forgotten, one he thought carried no weight. But he was wrong. Graham wasn't going to sink quietly. Despite the tables turning, he still had one last card to play. A secret meeting was arranged at an abandoned warehouse south of the city. There he would meet Ray, a former agent he had paid handsomely to clean up his messes. Now Graham needed an accident, a way for Rowena to disappear from the game. That night, Rowena left the press conference with the investigative organizations, her heart full of resolve. But she quickly realized she was being followed. A black car, no license plate, was tailing her through every turn, every street. She didn't panic. On the contrary, she tightened her lips, slammed the accelerator, and made a sharp turn into an alley behind the old train station, where she had arranged to meet someone else. As the car pulled to a stop, 3 SUVs arrived, blocking the front and rear. Federal agents emerged from the vehicles, along with a familiar face, Curtis, holding a camera. Ray was pulled out of the driver's seat, not resisting. On him, an unlicensed gun, a phone with encrypted messages from Graham. Everything had been calculated. At that moment, Rowena's phone rang. She looked at the screen and smiled coldly. "Graham," she said, her voice calm, "thank you for giving me a reason to end this." On the other end, Graham was silent. He knew he had been lured in, step by step. He sat back in his chair, his vacant gaze drifting to the garden, once the venue for fake fundraising events. The game was over. But there was one more chapter to deliver the verdict. 3 months after Ray's arrest, the town of Fairhill was no longer the same. A series of assets that had been donated to Graham's charitable foundations were seized. The lands that had been coerced into sale, forcibly bought, or stolen without documentation were now under federal investigation. The black families who had once been evicted from their homes began to reclaim the property of their ancestors. But no one clapped, no one smiled. They had lost too much to rejoice. The trial of Graham Thorne lasted exactly 11 days. Charges of fraud, manipulation of land records, money laundering, and conspiracy to murder a witness were all exposed with clear evidence. Graham said nothing in front of the jury. He simply sat still, his head bowed low, his eyes vacant, as though he had just woken from a 30-year-long slumber. When the verdict was announced, 27 years in federal prison without parole, no one in the courtroom clapped. Only the dry gavels strike and the judge's pen signing the final document rang out, marking the last period on a story never before written in history. Rowena walked out of the courtroom, not answering the press. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, a long earth-colored coat, and turned down the small street leading to the bus station, where people still walked quietly as if nothing had happened. A child rode past on a bicycle, looked up at her, and asked, "You're the one who sent that man to prison, right?" Rowena turned around, looked the boy straight in the eye, and smiled. "No, I'm just the one who remembered I had a name." That evening, she returned to her mother's old house, the one that had been seized 30 years ago and was just returned. The walls were still the same old paint. The door still creaked when opened. But on the kitchen table, there was a handwritten letter, unsigned. Inside, there was only one line: "They may forget our names, but they can't bury the truth. Thank you for digging it up." She knew who wrote it. It could have been one of the many families who had been forced to sell their land. Or perhaps it was an old woman who lost her home, whose name no one remembered. Or it could have been the spirit of her mother, the one who once said, "Land doesn't disappear. It just temporarily leaves your hands." Rowena stood and looked at the barren garden. She took off the old ring from her finger, the same ring Graham had seen when she fixed his car, and buried it beneath the long-dead orange tree. Not because she wanted to forget, but because the truth had risen again. No monument, no name in history books. Just the land returned to its rightful owners. Just the ones who thought themselves invincible, knowing that justice, though slow, always comes.